G'day YouTube, Turbo Tristan here, and in today's video, a little bit serious, I want to teach you guys about adjusting coilovers, what to do and what not to do. There are literally billions of videos on YouTube about coilovers, all different brands, all different kinds. I recently saw a video that related to our community and what we do, and there's a couple of pretty big no-nos in there, and I want to talk to you guys about it just so that I could help people stay safe, make sure their car rides well, handles well, and does what it's supposed to do, and still look cool at the same time. So stick around and I'll share with you some knowledge. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. The reason I'm making this video is because recently I installed some coilovers on the EF Civic project that I'm currently working on my channel. The car didn't seem to want to go low enough. It didn't look as good as we wanted, and there wasn't as much adjustment as I would have liked. I've made some reports. I've reported back to the suspension manufacturer, and they assure me that they're going to make some changes to their entire range and help get that issue sorted for everyone else moving forward. At exactly the same time as I did a video, on the other side of the world, someone else in the Honda scene did a video. And before this video starts, I don't want to name any names. I will show a couple of pictures and clips from there so you guys can see what I mean. But I'm not talking smack about anyone. I very much admire and respect the person that made the video, and I'm sure they had their reasons for it. But I really want to make sure that nobody gets seriously hurt or damages their pride and joy or wastes their money by chopping up their brand new suspension parts that they've gotten. So that's why we're making this video. No disrespect to anybody at all. Much love and respect and appreciation. I actually studied this person's videos a long time before I began making my first video and learn a lot from them. So I've learned a lot in the last year or two as well, and I want to pass that info on to you guys. So the video that I'm talking about was another video install of coilovers on a very similar car, an 88 CRX versus an 88 EF Civic hatch. Both use the same brand of coilover, which is their brand new design, and there's so far no data testing these. Only a very select number of YouTubers have been able to test these coilovers, and all reports suggest that they are a big improvement. On one of these particular product lines, they're advertising a 3-inch maximum drop, and we just didn't see that. We saw about not even 1-inch drop. So that information's gone back to get the car looking the way we want, which, let's be honest, the main reason that we put coilovers in a car is for the look. We're not all race car drivers, but you do still want to daily your car, drive it around, have it look cool, and still be somewhat comfortable, even though there's a bit of a compromise when you stick coilovers in your car. They're not always going to be soft and cushy like factory. So firstly, I just want to point out some of the parts on a coilover. Now, this is my drawing. I'm not a school teacher. I'm not an artist. I just did my best. So here we have an average looking coilover. So here you will see a pretty basic design of a coilover. Starting from the top, we have the dampener adjustment, and there's usually a knob or a dial or some kind of dial to adjust left and right to screw in and out a valve, which is down here in the shock body. So that's your dampener adjustment. From there, you have the strut top, which is the plate that holds the spring in at the top. You've got some bolts here that you screw your nuts onto to hold it into the car. Then you have your coil spring, which is this blue line here, which is my best drawing of a coil. And then you also have the strut in the center. That's the part that goes up and down inside the shock body, which is the main body of the car. And then you also have here, kind of looks like a doo-doo emoji, but that's a bump stop just there. And then right at the bottom, you have the cup and strut mount. Now, I've pulled quite a lot of these apart, and I've actually, with a welder and a grinder, I've cut up and made and remanufactured and made my own coilover cups so that I could repurpose them into another car. This is the shock body. So this essentially is your shock absorber, and on a coilover, it has a threaded outer, and that's so it can screw into the cup down the bottom there like that, and you can mount your locking rings, which I forgot to label. That's these red things here. They're the bits that you screw up and down and lock and unlock. And then the spring sits onto there. This is a generic strut top. This one's for the back of a Civic. And that would go up here just like that. And then you'll have the strut will go through and it'll all mount up. Now normally there'll be a spring on top of this. I've used them. They're on a car somewhere. So that's why I don't have that. But the reason why I wanted to make this video is the person that I saw fitting the coilovers, they actually didn't go low enough. So when I say low enough, it's a matter of adjusting the base of the strut or the shock body down lower into the cup. That drops the whole assembly down lower into the cup like so. Now the strut part inside the shock body, it doesn't actually always go maximum up, maximum down. And there's a few reasons for that, because one, it would bottom out and that wouldn't last very long and it'd blow all your seals out and everything. And the other one is that if you're got that much travel, there's definitely something wrong. Now, if you have a street car that you like taking for drives on the track, or just want to look cool and be lowered and just cruise it around normally, or do some hill or canyon runs, you'll want a slightly firmer ride, get more feedback, less body roll, so the car sloshing side to side. And to do that, you would fit a lowered spring and a stiffer shock, all matched to suit, and then you can get a much firmer ride. But you still need a shock to basically do the same thing as standard. It still needs to go up and down, and it still needs to bound and rebound against the rest of the forces that's happening in and around the car. So in this video, I'm not going to talk too much about the science of it and how it all works and bound, rebound, spring rates, all that sort of stuff. Honestly, I don't know. I'm not an expert. If you do want expert advice on something like that, go to a suspension specialist in a specialist shop or a performance shop, and they can help you. For the most part, and I know most guys just want to get their car lowered, looking good, the fitment right, and they just want to cruise the car around, go and hard park it, sometimes go up and down the canyons or the hills, and occasionally go to a racetrack, maybe if you're lucky or if you're keen. But I do know that's not for everyone. But something that is for everyone is safety, and that's why I'm making this video. So I'm not trying to be an expert, because frankly I'm not, but I do know how things work and how to keep them together and how it should be assembled. Now, with your shock body that lives right here, there's a certain amount of travel, and the way you get your travel is you get a bit of preload on the spring. So the spring might be set at, say, for example, 5 kilos. That'll be the spring rate per inch or millimeter, not quite sure. So what you want to do is get a bit of preload. So you'll push the spring up, so you'll wind it up from here and push that into the top. So it just sort of takes up just a little bit of the slack. We're talking maybe 3 to 5 millimeters at the most, just so the spring's not jangling around in there when there's no weight on the car. So you'll want the spring captive and with a slight amount of tension. Now that means that the spring can also extend out to its maximum extension when it goes over a bump and the wheels travel up and down. But it also means that there's no slack in the suspension when you're starting off. Now, if you want to lower the car, the way you do that, there's usually 2 of these locking rings here, sometimes 2 there. So the reason why there's 2 up the top is you set your height with the top one and then you lock it with the bottom one, which will live just under there. So now that you've locked your rings together, they won't move. It's locked on these threads. You've sort of tightened them against each other so that they won't move up and down. What you'll then need to do is unlock the bottom one. Wind that up, give yourself an amount of adjustment. So wind that up to say right here. And then if you want to lower the car down, you wind it down inside the cup. Now on the cup, it'll be threaded opposite to this on the inside. So when you screw this down, it's just like a nut and bolt. You screw this down. Now there might be threads most of the way down, sometimes all of the way down. Sometimes on cheaper sets or sets with not much adjustment, there'll only be a little bit of thread at the top. So once you've wound that all the way down to its maximum thread depth, you can usually wind it down all the way till this part here at the base bottoms out on the bottom of the cup, because they're usually always sealed or they're tapered in so that it won't go all the way through and out the bottom. So once that gets to there, that's your maximum adjustment. Now I'll throw a picture up here of showing from this other person's video. They have the cup apart, they have the strut out and the shock body out, and they put them side to side, and you can see exactly how far up the cup the threads go and how much room there is. This is where it gets a little bit tricky, and this is where I have the issues with the safety, which I wanted to tell you guys about. So once this is all the way down here, the only other way you can lower the car, and this is certainly not recommended, is by loosening off of these two rings and winding them down. So you wind the bottom all the way down, the spring is still at the top, the distance between here and here hasn't changed, it's just gotten shorter inside the body. If you then undo the threads on the top here and wind that down, you're reducing the amount of travel, because when there's weight on the car, it's going to go down to its lowest point and it's going to rest on the spring. So if you do that, your shock travel, instead of being at its maximum, it's already going to be halfway down, and then when you hit a bump, it's going to bottom out, and then it can't extend all the way up either. So you don't want to adjust from the top, but if you want to go lower, that's your only option left. Once you've maxed out these threads here, that's your only option to go lower. Now you're really only doing that for looks, because you're totally ruining your shock travel, you're dampening the way the car rides and the handling of it, believe it or not. Lower doesn't always mean it's going to handle better. It's all about your spring rate, your shock travel, and handling the bumps. So what this person did probably seemed like a good idea at the time, and again, not having a crack at anybody, but they took a grinder out and they cut off around about an inch or so of the top of the strut top there. So now that's missing. Remember, there's only threads, 2/3 of the way down. Once you put the shock in and wind it all the way down, it's still at the same height. It hasn't changed at all. All you've done is cut this down, meaning that you can bring this top part down lower. So I've just redrawn that where I've rubbed away the top of the cup, and you can see the distance of everything is still the same. If you wind this down, your shock travel is much less. You're going to be almost down to the bump stop as you wind this down here, just to get your height down lower. The reason why this is dangerous is because then you're riding on no shock travel, so there's nothing absorbing the bumps. You're just sitting on springs essentially, and springs that aren't even really captive, because as soon as you go over a big bump or the road sort of dips away from you, the shock's going to extend all the way again, and then the spring's not going to become captive any longer. So that's going to be jangling around once you go over a bump, and then the weight comes off the wheel, it's going to extend, and then you're going to have a loose spring. The danger of that is when the car lands again, it might land off center. It could fall out in some cases or get stuck on a bad angle, and then it's going to cause your suspension to move and bend, your wheel alignment to be out, the one side might be higher than the other, all kinds of problems that you don't want. On the flip side of that, on the other end, you're putting a lot of weight and stress into one part here. Now before, when the cup was taller, you're putting all of that weight and stress in an area this big. Now you're concentrating that onto an area this big for no real gain or benefit. That's the mistake right there, is cutting that. That's your first mistake. The second mistake is then winding the springs down lower just so it looks better, meaning that you have no shock travel and you're down close to or on your bump stop, meaning the car has nowhere to go. It's just going to go bang and up. It can only go up from there. Once it's on the bump stop, it can only go up. And this is going to cause many, many problems. One thing that I have stressed to this particular manufacturer of coilovers is to put a witness hole inside the cup. So you must be able to see through that hole the base of this. If it's too tall, you don't have enough thread contact patch, and then you can snap that out. Once you go past that hole, I'll be right back. I'll fix up the drawing. The picture is back to basically how it was. We still have the same amount of shock travel. We have the cup back to its former glory. We've got the bottom lock ring on, the top lock rings are on. You've got your preload on your spring. The strut is extended to where it needs to be. You're not on the bump stop. Everything's sweet. You've adjusted your coilovers. You're ready to go. There's one thing that I've instructed this particular manufacturer of coilover to do, is to put a witness hole. Now, if you had a hole that was, say, here, that you could look into, and you had the coilovers too high, if you looked in that hole, you wouldn't be able to see these threads. So you need to wind that down until you can see the shock. Then you will have a safe depth of thread, and everything will be contacting, and the load will be spread out evenly on the body of the shock. So that's one thing that I recommend. And you usually do that at the bottom of the thread. So there might be threads all the way down to this point, and then this remaining area will be just a hollow chamber that you can wind down into. So just dead space. So if we had that, we would know not to go lower than that. Now, this doesn't solve the problem of this coilover kit not being low enough or not having that promised 3 inches of drop or range. The only way you're going to do that is if you were to engineer a new shock body to go inside all your other awesome components. That would be shorter. So if you needed to lower the car by an extra 2 inches, you could take 1 inch out of here and 1 inch out of here. That would work. You'd still be able to preload your spring. You'd still be able to have adjustment, and that would work. But then you're going to have less ability to transfer the heat. Now, one thing that we did in my shock dyno video, and I learnt a lot that day, or that night, sorry, with Chris from Shockworks, who I consider to be the absolute expert in Australia, possibly the world. The guy's a genius. He's got 30 years plus of his dad's knowledge, plus his own knowledge. It's a family business. They've done nothing besides suspension their entire lives. So trust those guys. Thanks again for letting me come out to your shop and doing some dyno testing. We learned a lot that day. Well, I did. One thing I learned though is when you're doing hill runs, bouncy roads, corrugated roads, rough terrain, lots of potholes, if you live in a rough neighborhood and your streets are crap, or you're driving on a dirt road, because people use coilovers for rallying, a smaller shock body, so less oil or gas, in this case hydraulic oil inside there, the less amount of oil or fluid inside, the hotter it's going to get, the more it bounces up and down. So it bounces up and down, the temperature inside here gets hot because you're compressing all those atoms together, they're smashing against each other causing heat. There's also a portion of air as well that goes in and then it cavitates, so then you've got bubbly, frothy foam inside there, and then just the efficiency of everything doesn't work. So what you would need to do then would be make this fatter, do some twin tube, put an external reservoir off to the side, all of that to get a lower ride. So there's a lot to look at, think about, and talk about when you're lowering your car. It's not just chop, 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 it sits low, it's good to go. Not the case. You don't want to have holding this on with just a couple of threads. You can see it's really easy for me to move that, but if I hold it up here, it becomes a lot harder for me to move. So you need a lot of grip on the bottom of the body. You still need to have the full range of motion there, and you still need to have some preload on your spring. So those are just some things to consider. Lastly, I'm not having to go at anyone. I just would not recommend cutting that, giving yourself not much to hold on the threads with. And I also don't recommend lowering this down to here, giving yourself a big gap of coil here between here and here. If you did that, your coils would certainly be flopping around everywhere. As soon as you go over a bump and the suspension extends, the wheels go up and down, you get a bit of travel. That will then become loose or non-captive, and then you're going to run into all sorts of problems there and there. So I definitely don't recommend it. Just really a public service announcement. Again, I'm not an expert. Flame me in the comments. Tell me everything I said that was wrong. Tell me how I don't know what I'm talking about. I'll tell you first, I don't really, but these are just some things I learnt. Stupid me, in the beginning, up until just this year, I used to raise up and down the coilovers from this one. So I made all those mistakes. I'm not perfect. I learned the hard way. Now I know to adjust it from the bottom to keep the preload where it needs to be. Didn't know that for years and years and years. Nearly 40 now, and I just learned. So hopefully you guys watching at home will learn that lesson, and I'll be able to pass that knowledge on, and you won't have to wait till you're 40 till you work that out. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to bring the boost, spool up, and we'll see you in the next video. Cheers.